Good evening guys, Sakafusi here, your personal data analyst. And as you can already see on your screen, Wildcard activated. I've pressed the button, the Wildcard is active, and in this video we'll go through all the stats, all the data, and all the information you need to plan your team for the upcoming game weeks, whether you're planning to play your Wildcard or not. So, let's start with a table that we actually won't be looking at much in the future, the fixture difficulty table so far. We won't need it as much later because after a certain point the fixture difficulties balance out. By then, most teams will have faced each other and their strength of schedule becomes more even. But since it's still early and we've only played 5 matches, some teams happen to face 5 tough fixtures, while others had 5 easier ones. That's important context, because if one player has scored 2 goals against weak opponents, and another has scored 2 goals against tough ones, clearly those two things are not the same. So, let's start with the table that shows us how difficult each team's fixtures have been so far in terms of attack. We can see here that Aston Villa are top with 0.78. What does that mean? It means Aston Villa's attack faced the toughest schedule, coming up against the strongest defenses. While against an average defense they'd be expected to score 1 goal, against the defenses they've actually faced, they were only expected to score 0.78. That's probably one of the reasons why players like Rodgers and Watkins didn't have a great start to the season. On the other side of the scale, the easiest schedule belonged to Sunderland with 1.27. In other words, if Sunderland's attack would normally be expected to score 1 goal against an average Premier League team, against the opponents they faced in the first 5 game weeks they were expected to score 1.27. This is the same table but from a defensive perspective. The team with the toughest schedule here was Manchester United, with 1.15. In other words, Manchester United have faced the strongest attacks in the league over the first 5 game weeks. By combining expected goals and expected assists with the fixture difficulty so far, we can project from game week 6 to game week 12, in other words, for the next 7 game weeks, which teams have the easiest attacking schedules and which ones have the toughest. The team with the easiest run is Manchester City, with a rating of 1.23. That means City are expected to score 23% more goals than their average over the next 7 game weeks. And it all starts with what is probably the best fixture anyone can have this season, game week 6, at home to Burnley, with a rating of 1.47. On paper, it's a very easy matchup, City are heavy favourites, and it might even be the perfect time to play the triple captain if you still have it and aren't planning to use your wild card this week. Now let's take a look at the same table, but this time for defences. At the top of the list we find Arsenal, with a rating of 2.58. That means over the next 7 game weeks Arsenal are projected to keep 2.58 clean sheets, starting in game week 6 against Newcastle, where their clean sheet probability is 0.36, in other words, 36%. At the very bottom of the list we have Burnley, who so far have been the weakest defense in the league. That's exactly why we mentioned earlier that Manchester City's home game against them is statistically the easiest fixture of the entire season, based on what we've seen so far. Now that we've analyzed the teams and their fixture difficulty, let's move on to the players by position, starting with the goalkeepers. Goalkeepers earn most of their points through saves and clean sheets. That's why in this chart, on the x-axis we have saves per 90 minutes. The further to the right a goalkeeper is, the more saves he's made so far. We can see that the furthest right is Darlow, who has made the most saves, averaging 4 per 90 minutes. On the y-axis we have expected goals conceded. The lower a goalkeeper is on this axis, the stronger his defense is and therefore the higher his chances of keeping a clean sheet. At the very bottom we find Pope from Newcastle, just under 0.6. If these goalkeepers maintain their current performance throughout the season, this is the average number of points they would collect from game week 10 onwards. At the top of the list is Pope from Newcastle, who, if he keeps up this level, would average 4.6 points per match. Defenders, on the other hand, earn most of their points through their attacking threat, clean sheets, and defensive contributions. In this chart, on the x-axis we have attacking threat, the further to the right a defender is, the more dangerous he has been in front of goal. Over the first 5 game weeks, the furthest right we see are qualifier with very high numbers. In my opinion, though, these figures aren't very realistic and probably won't be sustainable over the long run. Stay tuned, because later in this video we'll look at another dataset with a different metric to evaluate just how threatening defenders really are beyond just expected goals and assists. On the y-axis, we have expected goals conceded. The lower a defender is, the better his defense has been and the higher his clean sheet potential. At the very bottom, once again, is Newcastle's. You'll also notice that some of the dots are green and some are red. A green dot means the defender averages higher defensive contributions, which makes him more likely to pick up bonus points from those defensive actions. If defenders were to maintain exactly the same performance for the rest of the season, this table shows how many points they would average per match. At the very top we have Timber from Arsenal, with an expected 7 points per game. That's an extremely high number, and I don't think it's sustainable, but it's still a useful indicator to help us evaluate players based on what they've done so far and understand what really matters. For example, there's often a lot of focus on defensive contributions. But are they really that important? Well, it seems they are. Third on our list is Senesi from Bournemouth. Even though Senesi offers almost no attacking threat, with just 0.03 expected goals and 0.03 expected assists, he still ranks very high on expected points, with 5.84 per match, just behind Dier and Calafiori. And the reason is simple: on average, he records 13.2 defensive contributions per game. In practice, that means he's basically locking in the 2 bonus points from defensive contributions every single week. So while some defenders are hoping to score a rare goal or grab an assist, Senesi effectively has 2 points in his pocket every game just from his defensive work. As I mentioned earlier, I've put together a table with some data we can use to better evaluate the attacking threat of defenders going forward. Because defenders don't get forward very often and don't shoot much, it's difficult to assess their attacking potential just from expected goals and expected assists after only 5 game weeks. That's why, based on a statistical analysis I did last year, which is also in a video that might pop up on your screen right now, I looked for another metric that could serve as a more reliable predictor of whether a defender will deliver attacking returns in the future. What I found was that progressive passes received is a very strong indicator of attacking involvement. So, in this column here labeled PRPREX/90, we see the progressive passes each defender has received per 90 minutes. At the top of the list for the first 5 game weeks is one of Manchester United. And that makes sense when you think about it, because of the way United play. Their fullbacks are asked to push high and essentially operate almost like wingers. If Amad Diallo were listed as a defender in fantasy, he'd also rank very high here, but of course, in the game he's classified as a midfielder. From the rest of the defenders, I've highlighted a few in grey that stood out to me: Mitchell, Livramento, Munoz, Calafiori, and Cucurella. The reason I've highlighted Mitchell is that we already know from previous seasons he's a very attacking fullback. And with Crystal Palace's system of 3 centre-backs plus 2 wing-backs, both Mitchell and Munoz are naturally pushed high up the pitch. We can also see from this table that both of them are posting very strong numbers in progressive passes received this season as well, so we can confidently expect them to remain attacking threats. I've also highlighted Livramento because, as we saw earlier, Newcastle have one of the strongest defenses in the league this year. That means he has clean sheet potential, and combined with his high progressive passes received, there's also a good chance of attacking returns. Calafiori is on my list because, playing for Arsenal, we already know their fullbacks get forward a lot. He's already scored and created chances this season, and his relatively high progressive passes received numbers suggest it isn't just a fluke. Arsenal's system regularly pushes him into those advanced positions. The last one I've marked is Cucurella. Chelsea's defense has been solid, and from previous seasons we know he's a regular starter and one of their defenders who consistently gets forward. So, when it comes to defenders with attacking threat, I'd choose one from these 5 that I've highlighted in grey, and I'd combine them with Senesi from Bournemouth, who, as we saw earlier, racks up defensive contributions like crazy, and probably also Mukiel from Sunderland, simply because he costs only £4.0 million and offers strong value. Alright, I think we've spent enough time on defenders. Let's move on to something more exciting: the midfielders. In this chart, on the x-axis we have expected goals per 90 minutes. The further to the right a player is, the higher his xG per 90 so far this season. Furthest to the right is Gruda, but he's only played a very small number of minutes, so it's probably best to ignore him for now. Next up is Ismaila Sarr from Crystal Palace, and he's someone we should not ignore, mainly because he's just returning from injury. Overall this season, midfielders haven't put up very high attacking numbers, but Sarr is cheap, he's a nailed starter at Palace, and he's definitely worth keeping on our watch list, whether for now or in a game week or 2 once he's fully match fit. After those 2, we see Antony from Brentford and Semenyo from Bournemouth, both with fairly strong XG numbers so far. On the y-axis, we have expected assists. At the very top we find Chelsea. But the big question is whether he's actually going to be a reliable starter this season, and in my opinion, it's better to avoid players whose minutes are uncertain. We also see Grealish ranking very high for expected assists. You'll notice that some player names are in bold. that's because they're their team's penalty takers. And of course, penalties are an added bonus in FPL, something we should definitely take into account when evaluating midfielders. Finally, just like with defenders, the color of each dot indicates the likelihood of earning bonus points from defensive contributions. We can see, for example, that Fernd and Ndiaye are two popular picks who also have strong numbers in this area. If these midfielders maintain the same performance for the rest of the season, this is how many points they would average per match from now on. Here we also factor in their expected minutes, which is why at the very top we find Sarr. Once he's fully back from injury, he's projected to average 7.13 points per game if he keeps up this level of performance. Right behind him is Semenyo from Bournemouth with 6.61 points. Next on the list we see Fernandes from Manchester United, as well as Mbemo from Man United, and also Ahmad from United. I know many of you will be surprised and asking, but wait, United are terrible, how can all these players be so high in expected points? The answer is twofold. First, midfielders in general this year have been weak. Apart from Sarr and Semenyo, there hasn't been a standout option. Second, there's a massive underestimation and a trend of bashing United. Yes, they're not the best team, but that doesn't mean they can't have players with strong attacking threat. Take Mbemo for example. He currently averages 0.39 expected goals per 90 and 0.27 expected assists per 90. Those are excellent numbers for a midfielder. And it doesn't matter whether he plays for United, Brentford, Brighton, or anyone else, with that kind of attacking output, goals and assists will come. Fernandes, on the other hand, has more modest numbers, 0.24 xG per 90 and 0.20 XA per 90. But he's also the penalty taker, and with an average of 10.9 defensive contributions per 90, he's likely to pick up defensive bonus points in about half of United's matches. Another player worth mentioning is Antony. The main reason he's so appealing is his price, just 5.5, and so far he looks very threatening. Enzo Fernandez is also on my watch list, because as long as Palmer is out, he's been ruled out for 3 to 6 weeks, Enzo will continue taking penalties for Chelsea, which makes him a valuable option. Now, on the flip side, let's also talk about the disappointments. Salah, despite being the most expensive player in the game, has just 0.09 xG per 90 so far. That's a truly underwhelming number, and there's no reason to keep such an expensive player in your team right now. That money is much better invested in Haaland, who is in fantastic form. We also see that Gakpo and put up very low numbers. Overall, I think Liverpool have been quite lucky so far, and in my view, it's probably time to start moving away from their players little by little. Now let's move on to the forwards. Things here are a bit simpler, since their points basically come only from goals and assists. On the x-axis we have expected goals per 90 minutes, and as you can see, no, this is not a mistake, Haaland is in a league of his own. There's a massive gap between him and the second best forward, who is Beto. Haaland is sitting at almost 1.4 expected goals per game, while Beto, in second place, is just under 0.6. There's honestly a real lack of quality strikers right now. The very popular Gyökeres, for example, look how low he is, around 0.3 xG per 90, which is a really poor number. João Pedro is also way down the list. Here in bold are the players who are on penalties. And given that most strikers are underperforming right now, the best option outside of Haaland might actually be Mateta. At least we know his spot is secure, he plays 90 minutes every game, he's on penalties, and he'll chip in with goals across the season. If the forwards keep performing at the same level for the rest of the season, this is how many points they would average per match. At the very top, and by a huge margin, of course, is Haaland, with 9.53 expected points per game. That's almost double the total of the second-placed forward. In second we have Mateta from Crystal Palace. As we said earlier, he has a decent attacking threat, he's on penalties, he plays 90 minutes, and that makes him the second-best striker option after Haaland. But beyond that? It's a mess. Honestly, I don't know who I'd pick from the rest. The model shows Welbeck and Beto around third and fourth place, but we also know these are players you can't really trust, you never know if they'll even be starting. So for your third striker spot, honestly, go with whatever your gut, or God, tells you. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the wildcard draft. Using all the data we've looked at so far, we ran our model to build the best possible team you could have right now if you activated your wildcard. In goal, the model gives us Pope from Newcastle. As we saw earlier, he tops the expected points for goalkeepers, and Newcastle's defense has been rock solid this season. He's paired with Bravo, simply because he's the only 4.0 goalkeeper who's nailed as a starter for his team. In defense, the model picked Senesi for his incredible defensive contributions, Livramento from Newcastle, who benefits from a great defense and also offers some attacking threat, and Calafiori, for the same reasons, combining Arsenal's strong backline with forward involvement. Cucurella also makes the cut as a steady, reliable Chelsea defender with good defensive contribution numbers at a reasonable price. Finally, Mukiel from Sunderland completes the list. He has insane defensive contribution stats, and at just 4.0 million he's a fantastic enabler. Moving into midfield, we have Sarr and Semenyo, the only two midfielders who've really shown any spark so far this season, plus Mbeumo, who's been very threatening even if the goals haven't come yet, but they will. Antony is also in, as despite his low price of 5.5, he looks very dangerous and is well worth the money. And of course, Fernandes, a bit more expensive, but with a mix of penalty duties, decent attacking threat, and strong defensive contributions, he always finds ways to collect points. Given the lack of strong midfield options this year, he deserves a spot. Up front, Haaland is a must-have. He's in insane form and simply cannot be left out. Next to him we have Mateta, who, as we've said, is the only striker outside of Haaland who looks reliable right now. And the third forward is João Pedro from Chelsea. He hasn't shown much yet, but with Palmer and Delap currently out injured, at least we know he'll be starting every game, and that job security is valuable. As we saw earlier, Salah's numbers this season have been really disappointing. But many of you asked me to create a draft that includes both Haaland and Salah. So that's exactly what I did. Most of the players are the same as in the previous draft. But in order to fit Salah into the team, we had to make a few sacrifices. One change is that Livramento has been dropped, and in his place we've brought in Anderson from Fulham, a cheap defender with very strong defensive contribution stats. Another sacrifice is Mbeumo, who has been replaced by Caicedo from Chelsea. This was done purely for budget reasons. At his price, Caicedo is a pretty honest option. His defensive contributions are very high, which means he picks up bonus points almost every game. And up front, to free up more funds, João Pedro has been replaced by Calvert-Lewin. He costs only 5.5, and in the little time we saw him against Leeds, he actually looked in good shape. He could be a useful option in certain fixtures where Everton have an easier opponent. So, those were the two drafts I put together for you. Let me know in the comments if you like them, if you agree or disagree with some of the picks, and what changes you would make yourselves. Also, if you've activated your wildcard, feel free to share your team with me and I'll review it. Before we wrap up, let's take a quick look at the most popular transfers of the week so far. At the very top, no surprise here, is Haaland. He's got Burnley at home, he's in incredible form, and of course, everyone who doesn't already own him is rushing to bring him in, and rightly so. Senesi and Semenyo are also very high on the list of popular transfers, which also makes perfect sense. As we've said, Senesi is the best cheap defender right now thanks to his defensive contributions, and Semenyo is basically the only midfielder who has really stood out as an attacking threat this season. But then, we see Donnarumma and renters. Honestly, I don't know who you guys are wasting your transfers on goalkeepers. Goalkeepers are the players who score the fewest points in your team. Please don't waste transfers on them. Save those for outfield players. Only change your keeper if you're on a wildcard, or if something unusual happens, like an injury, a suspension, or if he loses his starting spot. It's honestly crazy to me that 316,000 people decided to spend a transfer just to bring in Donnarumma. As for the most popular sales this week, we can see that basically half of Liverpool is being sold. Salah, Nunez, Jota, like we said earlier, they've all been underperforming. It's completely logical that managers are moving them on, they've disappointed their owners. And honestly, it makes total sense to sell Salah, Nunez, or Jota in order to bring in players like Haaland, Semenyo, or Senesi. So overall, most of the popular transfers in and out this week look very reasonable, with the exception of Donnarumma, of course. Please, stop buying goalkeepers. If there's one single takeaway from this entire 20-minute video, it's this: don't waste your transfers on goalkeepers. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Sakafusi, make sure to leave a like, it really makes my day. Best of luck with your teams, and I wish you lots of green arrows.